set?
Yep.
Man, behind the curtain, where we're like batching all of these, and I'm all thrown off right now by doing this intro 4 times in a row and stuff. This is the Restoring Human podcast. We like food.
We like food.
I'm Jarek. This is Alex. Where we're going right now, breaking down what, it's really what the heck is food? What's it comprised of at a macronutrient level, and a little bit of how our body treats that stuff. So, at its core, there's 3 macronutrients: fat, protein, carbohydrates. What do those 3 things do, and what are they?
So it is the macro part of it. What that just means is that we need more fat, protein, and some would say carbohydrates, more so than we need like micronutrients. So like vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin D. Those are all micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. So that's the whole macro part. Bigger, we need more of them. We need a balance. Everybody would agree with that there's a balance that is required in order for our bodies to be healthy.
Meaning you need all of them. You can't survive on just one.
Can't just survive on just one. Absolutely. But there are essential fatty acids. So that means part of the fat macronutrient, they're what are called essential, meaning that our body cannot make them. So we take these nutrients in and we use them for certain functions of our body. So our bodies can't make these essential fatty acids. So we need those from our diet. There are also essential amino acids, meaning we can't manufacture these amino acids in our body. So therefore we need them in our diet. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Basically, what that means is carbohydrates break down to what we know as glucose, which is a form of sugar that our bodies put into our energy pathways to be able to make something called ATP. So that's really the only reason to eat sugar, is because we need energy. Our bodies can make glucose on their own from proteins, from fat. So we don't need carbohydrates. Now, the whole protein, carb, fat thing, that came from nutritionists, that came from even like chefs labeling these things. That's not, food is food, right? A piece of meat is a piece of meat. Some dairy is dairy. An apple is an apple. It's going to be made up of macronutrients and micronutrients. So it's not like we can just say stop eating carbohydrates, because there's things that are in carbohydrates that are also important for us. That's where we do get the food that has carbohydrate in it. Also is where we would get micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, as well as fiber is another thing that our bodies need, specifically not necessarily our bodies, but things that are inside of our bodies. Bacteria also need those things. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I just threw a lot out there.
Yeah. So let's tackle each one individually. So let's go with protein first.
Mm-hmm.
What is protein? Why do we need it? Because we kind of established. Well, actually, you actually said we don't need carbohydrates, but anyway, we said can't survive with just one thing. So what is it about protein that we need, and what foods contain protein?
Yeah, so really our bodies are made out of protein. So
The cells.
yeah. So, proteins break down into something called amino acids. Like I said, there's some essential amino acids. Amino acids come together and they form protein. So like when we're eating something with protein in it, that's just a mixture of some amino acids that are in that food. But our bodies are made out of amino acids. So our DNA, that's made out of amino acids that come together, and that's what forms everything in our body, is amino acids. So our muscle tissue, our organ tissue, all this stuff are made out of protein. So this stuff always gets broken down, and then our bodies has to eat. They can either, again, make some of the proteins, manufacture them themselves, or we have to get them from our food, the ones that are essential to be able to rebuild muscle tissue, be able to rebuild, ligaments, all the different tissues that are made out of protein. That's the specific main reason why we need to be eating protein. Our immune systems are protein called immunoglobulins. That's a form of a protein. So we need this protein to be able to just continue to repair, rebuild, heal our bodies.
Yeah. So I think two most popular things people probably know about protein. Number one is that most protein in nature is coming from animal products.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yep.
And kind of the second thing that maybe if you less people know about is kind of the role protein plays in building of muscle, for example. And so, like you're saying, it's kind of like the bedrock of our body building anything. People kind of get that a little bit with understanding, okay, I need, a certain amount of protein to be able to create more muscle.
Mm-hmm. Did you just ask me something there?
Well, maybe in line with like the animal products type of thing. Is that the only place we're getting protein, or how's that work?
No, I mean, there's plant-based proteins that you can get protein from. So, I mean, whole grains have protein in them. Pea has protein in it. So there's definitely non-animal products, forms of protein. But then there's also egg protein. There is beef protein. There's proteins that, of course, that come from chicken. And then there's what are called whey protein is found in dairy. Casein is another protein that's found in dairy. So there's some proteins that are more helpful to us than others. Some proteins are damaging to our bodies. If you have poor gut health specifically.
Sure.
So yeah, there's plenty of different sources, but the majority of it is coming from animal products. Those are going to be the most. They're just going to have the kind of a complete, what's called a complete protein. So maybe you've heard of incomplete. Incomplete proteins. Incomplete would be like eating beans. They're just going to have some of the amino acids. They're not going to have all of them.
Incomplete. You're talking about the
profile of amino acids that's in it. Yep. So that's why a lot of times, if you are like a vegan or a vegetarian, they'll eat beans and rice together. It's because that'll complete the amount of the profile of amino acids that a body requires. I would just say it's easier to get from eating animal products. That's
sure. Absolutely. Okay.
Animal products.
So that's protein. How about fat? What is fat? Where does it come from? How do we get it? That type of stuff.
Yep. So fat is made up of fatty acids. So again, it gets broken down to an acid level. So when we eat fat, if there's plant-based fats like an avocado, or an olive, or there's the oils that come from those things like olive oil, avocado oil, nuts oils, and then there's of course nuts and seeds also have fat in them. But then there's also fat on animal products, just like there's fat in us, because an animal is eating something and it's an energy store, so it stores.
Very similar, like digestive system.
Yeah, so it's going to store fat, so we can get fat from eating animal products as well. But again, what fat primarily is for is somewhat for protection. So like we need fat around our organs for protection. We need fat in our bodies to keep us warm. So just kind of be able to maintain homeostasis, we need a level of fat on our body. But how most fat, or I guess, how do I say that? The fat that we see on people's bodies is not necessarily the level of fat is required for homeostasis. That's in abundance. It's over what's typically required. And the reason that gets there is not necessarily because I've eaten fat. It's because I've eaten really any type of storage molecule or energy molecule, proteins or fats, and our body can't utilize those for energy. So if it can't utilize them right away, it'll store it on our bodies. So that's whether you're eating too many carbohydrates or if you're actually even eating fat, somehow the body's going to try to use that. If it can, it's going to store it.
Yeah. So very contextual on a day like today. The fat for warmth thing, totally true. Experienced it like for sure. Like I am way more sensitive now with however many percentage less body fat currently than I used to have. Like it feels so much colder than I ever remember it feeling when it's, I mean, granted, it's cold, but like,
yeah,
that's real.
Yeah. I mean, there's some other things. I mean, I don't think we can get into all the different stuff, but back to those micronutrients, there's what's called fat-soluble micronutrients. So vitamin A, D, E, and K can't be absorbed by our body unless they're in some sort of a fat source. So our body has to be able to break down that fat. We have to, of course, eat it with the fat, or we're not going to be able to have sufficient levels of those vitamins. So, but mainly it's storage. Mainly how it gets on us is because our body says, "I want that. I'm going to store it for later use."
So then, let's hit carbohydrates, and then we'll kind of like mix between these. What are carbohydrates? Where do we find them?
So carbohydrates break down into small molecules. Eventually it gets to glucose, which is what is an energy source. So we can use that. Goes into, again, the energy pathways. So if you remember any sort of science, 7th grade science, there's something called the Krebs cycle.
Dude, like multiple times in the past week, I've thought about, man, I wish I could like go back to biology and that kind of stuff. It's like,
yeah, if we had application, right?
It.
We didn't have any application back then, so we
Right.
didn't care about it. But yeah, so that's how we get to making actual energy. So that's what happens to the actual carbohydrate. It gets broken down, used for energy, or stored as fat on our body. Where we're going to find carbohydrates is typically plant products. So vegetables have carbohydrates in them. Fruits have carbohydrates in them. Whole grains have carbohydrates in them. You're not going to get carbohydrates from butter. You're not going to get a ton of carbohydrates from any sort of meat product, any sort of even dairy product. You're going to get it mainly from the plant-based stuff.
Yeah. So with all of these things, there's a wide range of like stuff that we would call good fat, stuff that we would call bad fat, stuff we would call good protein sources and not so good protein sources. And I think carbohydrates is probably one of, I guess it's hard to rank them, but it seems like there's like the largest selection of carbohydrates like in nature. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because of what we've done with industrialization and being able to grow food, then yeah, most of the food I guess we see out there has carbohydrates in them.
Sure. So what are some of the differences between like something like I've got some like spinach and greens here and some cauliflower and say like a banana? Like what's the nuance happening there between something that's plant-based, it's primarily carbohydrates, what are the differences there?
Yeah, so there's basically the level, or the amount of carbohydrate that is going to turn into glucose in our body compared to the amount of fiber and other nutrients that are in that food. So if you like take kale is one of the most nutrient-dense foods, so it has all these vitamins and minerals and other phytonutrients in it in high amounts, and it has a lot of fiber. So when our bodies actually break it down, so it has some carbohydrate in it, but when our bodies break it down, that carbohydrate is very easily utilized for energy.
Sure.
It's never going to like spike our blood sugar where insulin has to get produced and then we're going to store it. Like you could eat all the kale you want and your body's going to stop eating kale before you ever got to a high blood sugar. It's never
Mhm.
gonna do that.
Yeah.
Why is it not doing that? Is because of how many nutrients are in it. So the body's using energy in a way, to, of course, to break it down to access those nutrients. It also has the amount of fiber that kind of slows down the how much you're actually taking, how much glucose, how much carbohydrate you're taking in. So when we compare that to like a banana also has vitamins, also has the minerals. It also has some fiber in it, but the amount of sugar content that's in that food is a lot higher.
Mhm.
So that's when if you're eating a bunch of bananas, of course, you are going to spike blood sugar, and then now hormones have to react, which then you can get into problems of storing instead of utilizing the energy.
Mhm. So as a general rule, most fruit has kind of a higher sugar content.
Mm-hmm.
So while like fruits primarily a carbohydrate, vegetables primarily a carbohydrate. Like the one of the big differences there is that sugar content.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm curious about, so when we look at something like grains, also primarily carbohydrate, but like pretty much zero sugar, correct?
Well, see, those they're going to have so a starchiness or a sugar content, basically anything that's eventually going to break down into sugar.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily you can't measure it, and it's not going to have a ton of sugar in it. But what the body does with any sort of carbohydrate is it gets down to glucose eventually.
Right.
So the basic form of sugar. So sugars can come together and make different forms of sugar, but it's always going to kind of get down to this most basic form before we can actually utilize it for energy.
Mm-hmm.
So even whether it's a whole grain, or if it's a banana, if it's again even some form of a lettuce, it's always going to try to get down to glucose.
Sure. So then how do you personally look at something like fruit compared to something like grains? Are you more apt to do you see one as superior to the other, or are they fairly similar like beasts?
Well, I guess there's some similarities to them. They're both real food.
Okay.
So I would say I would suggest somebody eat fruit or whole grains more so than eating
Sure. So
non-whole grains.
so
but still
baseline
grains.
baseline it's never something that you're going to like demonize somebody for going after.
Right. But I mean that's also person to person. Some people
Sure,
don't do
sure.
well with grains, or some people don't do well
Let me
with
put it this way.
fruit.
It's not something you personally are going to go out of your way to avoid at all cost.
Right. But again, it just gets to the amount. So if I'm just eating a whole meal of fruit,
Mm-hmm.
that's real food, but it's also fruit, or it's also food that's high in one of those macronutrients, which is carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you might be getting the nutrients and the micronutrients that are there, you're still not only giving yourself a ton of carbohydrates, but you're also not giving yourself the protein and the fat that is needed to maintain a healthy body.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's why in that CrossFit thing we talked about, it said little fruit, right?
Yeah, some fruit. Yeah.
Some fruit, very little starch. Because again, it's still a real food. It's still something we can ingest. But if we do it in abundance, we're eating too much of that and depriving ourselves of other stuff that is more important.
Yeah.
For the body.
Yeah. Okay, so we hit on it a little bit in last week's episode, but we need to have some sort of balance between these things. When we're looking at weight loss, and even when we're looking at health, the more we can use fat for energy, there's definitely a max out point there, but on the scale, we definitely want to be much further towards being able to use that fat for energy. We talked a little bit about that balance, having, that being the biggest portion of this pie, if we've got three, you can picture three sections here. That one being the biggest of the three. Um, like what does that look like on a daily basis? What does breakfast, lunch, dinner, or however many meals you're eating in a day, whatever. Like what is that? What does somebody's plate look like during those meals?
Yeah. Again, I think you can go back to what the to keep it simple, what CrossFit said. If you're eating meat and vegetables, so meat is going to have protein, it's going to have fat. The vegetables, of course, are going to have the carbohydrates, specifically because they also are filled with a bunch of micronutrients in those that you need. So breakfast-wise, if you're a breakfast eater, that's one of the most important times to stay away from carbohydrates, which is the exact opposite of what everybody does.
Right.
Standard American diet, they're eating bagels, they're eating donuts, they're eating oatmeal, whatever, cereal with milk. So reason being is because it's kind of how our body's designed, and with other hormones, kind of this rhythm of how hormones work throughout the day, is our bodies are a little bit insulin resistant in the morning.
Yeah.
So if we're eating something that is high in carbohydrates, we're going to spike our blood sugar, and then especially if it's something like a bagel or again or if it's like a sugary cereal, spike our blood sugar. Insulin has to respond to grab a hold of that sugar and get it out of our blood. Otherwise, it leads to diabetes type symptoms. But then now it's going to the cell. But if our cells are insulin resistant, it can't put them in. It can't put it in that cell. So it's either going to go back into the blood, or again the body's just going to store it as a fat cell. So we definitely don't want to be eating kind of carbohydrates in the morning. Now, when I first learned nutrition, I first started teaching nutrition, that's the opposite of even when I was trying to teach somebody to be healthy, that's the opposite of what I taught. What I taught people was, getting back to the whole kind of calories in, calories out thing, is if you're going to eat carbohydrates, eat them in the daytime because you would have all day long to burn them off.
Sure.
Stay away from them at night, because if you eat them at night, now you go to sleep and your body's not able to do
Sure.
Utilize them, so they're just going to be stored.
Sure.
Now it's again the opposite. Insulin resistant in the morning, stay away from carbohydrates. If you're going to eat even a meal with bigger carbohydrates like a sweet potato, or if you're ever going to have any rice, even if you're going to actually eat something that you shouldn't be eating that's high in carbohydrates, doing that closer towards the nighttime is going to be the best time to do it, just because again the hormone rhythm that we have in our bodies, it's better to eat those carbohydrates during that time, so you wake up and you're ready to go throughout the day. The right stress hormones and the insulin and everything that's being produced is that's not going to affect that as much as opposed to when you're eating it in the morning. So fat, protein, so that's eggs. Eggs are the go-to typically. For me, it's eggs, one of the most perfect foods that you can eat. Right amount of protein, right amount of fat, has lots of other nutrients, micronutrients in them. Of course, you want to try to get that as clean as possible. Organic, free-range eggs is what you want. But other animal products, whether that's a bacon, sausage, again, clean versions of that. If you're going to do a smoothie, you can do lots of good fat in a smoothie, whether it's coconut milk, avocado, other things that are going to nuts, seeds, nut butters. Yeah. All of these things are going to have good fat. So smoothies are huge. I mean, that's a way of, because again, that is one of the concerns when people say start eating more fat is, well, how do I get so much fat in my diet? Well, coconut is one of the most healthy fats that we can have. So coconut milk, coconut oil, coconut butter, putting that in smoothies is a good way to get that extra fat in there. Lunchtime, again, so I'm okay with people not even thinking about vegetables or that type of stuff in the morning. Having some sort of smoothie, maybe with a little bit of fruit for taste, but eggs, animal products, those are the main things that you want to be doing in the morning, or just even some nuts, because you don't need a huge meal in the morning anyway. And when you get to lunchtime, then that's when you're starting to add the vegetables and stuff in. So whether it's salad or sides of vegetables, but also some form of fat, some form of protein.
Mm-hmm.
Again, most likely animal products, whether that's fish, meat, chicken, or beef, chicken, those type of things. And then the same thing at night, meat, vegetables. That's when you can add sweet potatoes. You can add some rice. You can add other, if you're going to eat whole grains, some whole grain bread, those type of things.
Yeah. So, one thing I was going to ask you about, maybe it wasn't a super intentional decision, but your lunch you just had right there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that was the first thing you ate today.
It was.
So you exercised at.
Actually, I think I had some bites of my kids' breakfast this morning.
That happens. So you exercised at 6 o'clock. It was 11 or so, whatever you had that. But it was rice and a bunch of, like there's a healthy amount of fat mixed in there. Is that pork or something in there too?
Yeah, it was just chicken thighs, so a
okay.
fattier piece of that meat. There's some different oils and stuff in there that add fat.
Mm-hmm.
I threw some olives in there as well to increase the fat. And then one of the best things you can do if you need to increase fat is just throw some butter on top of whatever you're eating.
There was just a square of butter just sitting right in the middle.
So that's Kerrygold butter, grass-fed butter, cultured butter. You can tell kind of just how the color of it, it's almost even orangish type color, a dark yellow as opposed to kind of the pale yellow that doesn't have much nutrients in it at all. So I don't typically eat rice. My wife made some rice, I think specifically for this chicken dish that she had for the, I think it might have even been tonight. I took it for lunch. I was in a hurry. But yeah, and for somebody like me who has developed habits where I'm eating clean most of the time, and I'm at a fitness level where my body is always utilizing energy, I can handle things like rice. But if somebody is trying to lose weight, then that's definitely not something they would want to do at lunchtime.
Sure.
They would want to, if they're going to do a dish like that, separate or substitute like a cauliflower rice or something like that, as opposed to a white rice like I had in there. But I also threw we fermented some cayenne peppers or chili peppers or some type of pepper for like 30 days and it made a hot sauce out of it.
Nice.
Whatever the pepper is that you make Louisiana hot sauce out of, I don't know what that is.
I think it's cayenne.
So I put that all over it, and then turmeric, some other herbs. Basically, if I'm going to eat rice, I'm trying to make it as anti-inflammatory as possible, so I'm throwing in herbs that are anti-inflammatory, like turmeric. The butter's also anti-inflammatory, so adding that to it, the fermented hot sauce is going to be anti-inflammatory.
So that's super interesting. How we're way off in the weeds here, but the cultures that like rice is a pretty traditional food. So thinking about like Greek food, thinking about like Asian stuff. So turmeric is something that you're going to see a lot in like Greek food paired with something like rice. Asian food is often a lot of peppers and spices and stuff in there, and like that's like how those foods are typically prepared.
Yeah.
That's
right. Yeah, they're cooking with a lot of spices and herbs.
Right.
As opposed to like MSG and different stuff we use here. Or even the Asian places here switch to MSG.
American Chinese.
Yeah.
That's funny. We had the food we had last night was supposed to be like an American theme, and I'm looking on the internet like what is considered American food, and then one of the things popped up. It's American Chinese food, fried chicken and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, so that was just kind of generally what you could do. I mean, again, I've never done any sort of tracking. Like,
that's what I was gonna ask you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever done a longer?
I've tried to do like tracking of like how many carbs, how much protein, how much fat I'm eating, but it's just so hard for me. I'd almost rather not eat than do all that. So,
yeah, it's a pain.
And the reason I was doing it is not because, again, weight loss or anything. I for just because of how much I work out, I thought maybe that I was not giving myself enough calories. So if anything, I would have had to add more butter to my stuff or whatever else I was going to add, or maybe add a meal to what I was doing. But yeah, that's hard to do. So I mean, if you feel like if you're that type of person that has the time and the resources to be able to do that, I highly suggest doing that. I mean, that's good to do. But if it's going to stress you out, then I would say absolutely not. Just of course, and eat real food. Know generally kind of what are carbs, what are proteins, what are fats. Get foods that are higher in the fat, for sure. So that means like not eating lean, like don't get the 97.3 meat or whatever.
Sure.
Or don't eat just a white chicken breast with no fat on it. Like that's, everybody thinks again that that's the healthy thing to do because of the whole, everybody thought fat was bad.
So, sorry, continue.
Yeah, I was just say eat the fattier cuts of meat. It's more important to have the cleaner meats so that you can eat the fattier cuts of meat as opposed to, trying to get the leanest beef possible, because most of the people that are saying how lean their beef is, that's conventionally raised meat anyway, and it's not going to be healthy for you regardless of how lean it actually is.
Fair. So I have probably once a year for the past 4 or 5 years done like, maybe a month at a time, somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks, like tracked. I've done weighing and measuring, like that kind of stuff. And so for starters, yes, it's a huge commitment, becomes a pain in the butt, becomes very like when you're super committed to it, it's like a nightmare if you're like out to eat or something, and like I'm not gonna take this stuff and bring my little food scale and all that kind of crap. So it definitely becomes way overwhelming. But so one of the things that you're talking about, the chicken breast thing, one of the reasons why, like, especially in kind of like the even still in like the bodybuilding community, they might understand macronutrients, but avoid fat still because it is more dense per gram than any of than like the most of the three. And so it's like when you're looking at eating volume of food, a handful of almonds is like 3 bags of spinach, Yeah. So I think that's where, especially when we're looking at weight loss, people are like, oh, I want to steer clear of fat because it's so dense and so much in like a smaller volume.
Yeah.
But kind of comparing those two things and like looking at the type of recommendations you made, it's like we can like the best carbohydrate sources we can get are things that like are not very dense and you can eat super high volume of. So having decent protein source, having a good fat source, and then making your volume in vegetables. I think we said at one point it's like the one thing that almost everybody who has an opinion on diet agrees on is eat as many vegetables as you want, So
non-starchy vegetables, so that's your the broccoli, kale, all the lettuces and peppers, onions, those type of things.
Yeah.
Eat those in abundance.
Yeah. Cool. We'll get into this again at some point, but how those things affect performance, that's something here we go, this is on the record. We should do figure out some sort of test to like see how go over like the typical understanding of how macronutrients affect performance and test some things, because there's some big ideas between carbohydrates and fat and that whole biz. So That's coming in the future. I don't know when. Maybe soon. But anyway, cool. Thank you. As always, brought to you by Great River Family Chiropractic. You can receive a free chiropractic consultation just by visiting greatriverfamilychiropractic.com/restoringhuman. Put your info in there, and you will receive a phone call or email or whatever. Whatever information you give, you'll get back. Okay.
There you go.
Peace.
Peace out.